Catholicism appears to play a small role in Twain's cultural appropriation of Europe. He seems anti-Catholic throughout his work. However, I will discuss the extent of the influence of European culture on Connecticut Yankee and Innocents Abroad in terms of the major themes of Catholicism that are embedded in that culture and that figure prominently in his response to an existential reflection on religion. Twain responds to concepts of pilgrimage, conversion, reverence, and betrayal in both works that show his concern for the authoritarian nature of Catholicism. At the same time, he attacks any form of institutional authority that may well reproduce the authoritarianism he attributes to the Catholic religion. Catholicism is complex. Pilgrimage, conversion, reverence, and betrayal are only a few of the metaphors that guide it. The liturgy, the celebration of Mass, the concept of redemption, the forgiveness of sins, the concept of community, these concepts and more are the framework of a religion that helped form European civilization. For the Catholic, pilgrimage involves going to a holy place, a shrine, a church, or a monument that will show self-reflection and renewal of purpose. The classic European version of this is the Pilgrim's Way of St. James, a rather vast network of routes leading to the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in Galicia, Spain. A pilgrim on this way of St. James will renew one's faith and will find oneself at peace with the Catholic Church. The renewal of faith is an act of conversion, of being forgiven of one's sins. Catholics are encouraged to view the act of conversion as a continual ritual, something found in the confessional box, as well through daily commitment to one's faith. Conversion for the Protestant is a political act of denial, of discarding the aims of Martin Luther, and from the Catholic point of view, of returning to the one true faith. Reverence occurs upon reaching the destination of the pilgrimage journey, recognizing that the heavenly realm can be found in the architectural aspects of the cathedral, the physical image becoming metaphors for the afterlife. Earth, heaven, basically. Reverence for the secular mind involves awe and respect for the work that these church builders did over a course of centuries. The Catholic concept of betrayal, as I'm redefining it, is a complex reenactment of the Last Supper, when Jesus is about to be betrayed by Judas and is about to be led to his crucifixion. The liturgical replication of this is dominant in the Catholic Mass when the communion is held, with the body of Christ converted into the wafer and wine. Right, this notion of betrayal, which is bound to the notion of continual pilgrimage and continual confession, sounds a bit strange at first. I am simplifying these concepts in terms of secular attributes rather than within the complicated religious doctrines. Generally, pilgrimage is a movement toward a sacred space to demonstrate a submission to one's faith. That submission is reverence. Conversion is the secular definition of acceptance of a different faith. Betrayal is the collapse of allegiance to someone or some governing idea. Aurel du Rocher, in an article he wrote in 1960, frames Twain's views toward Catholicism in Innocents Abroad. In this book, his attitude is not unqualifiedly hostile. It consists of three main factors: an incredulity regarding miracles and relics, hostility toward what he considered unjust activities of the church and some of its clergy, and a certain amount of understanding and approval of other members of the Catholic clergy. Many examples of fake miracles and relics can be found: the nails and pieces of the cross held by numerous church groups, the ashes of St. John found in a number of churches. His caustic hostility toward some members of the Catholic Church is clear. We were in the heart and home of priestcraft, of a happy, cheerful, contented ignorance, superstition, degradation, poverty, indolence, and everlasting, unaspiring worthlessness. Du Rocher notes the contrast between the magnificence of the cathedral and the poverty of the people. Twain writes, "As far as I can see, Italy is today one vast museum of magnificence and misery. All the churches in an ordinary American city put together could hardly buy the jeweled frippery in one of its 100 cathedrals. And for every beggar in America, Italy can show 100, and rags and vermin to match. It is the wretchedest, princeliest land on earth. Oh, sons of classic Italy, is the spirit of enterprise." So I'm overdoing it. Of self-reliance, a so noble endeavor, utterly dead within you, curse your indolent worthlessness. Why don't you rob your church? And as other critics have noted, Twain does admire some aspects of Catholicism. The pauper and the miser are free as any in the Catholic convents of Palestine. Their doors are always open, and there's always a welcome for any worthy man who comes. Whether he comes in rags or clad in purple, the Catholic convents are a priceless blessing to the poor. A pilgrim without money, whether it be a Protestant or a Catholic, can travel the length and breadth of Palestine, and in the midst of her desert wastes find wholesome food and a clean bed every night in these buildings. Our party, pilgrims and all, will always be ready and always willing to touch glasses and drink health, prosperity, and long life to the convent fathers of Palestine. The skepticism and ridicule about the sale of relics, this hostility toward the injustice of Italian society and religion, and the selective admiration for some of the people of the Catholic faith. All of this suggests that Innocents Abroad cannot reflect a single anti-Catholic sentiment. Jeffrey Allen Melton provides a good overview of the conventions of tourism for Twain, and for Innocents Abroad, the prevalent notion of Catholicism as a force for political repression. He also notes the contrast between the people of Italy and the governing authority represented by the Catholic cathedral. Twain writes that all about that church wretchedness and poverty abound. At its door a dozen hats and bonnets were doffed to us, as many heads were humbly bowed, and as many hands extended, appealing for pennies, appealing with foreign words we could not understand, but appealing mutely with sad eyes and sunken cheeks and ragged raiment that no words were needed to translate. Then we passed within the great doors, and it seemed that the riches of the world were before us. The subtitle of Innocents Abroad presents my case for pilgrimage, the new pilgrim's progress, even if it is a parody of the anti-Catholic conversion process of the Protestant John Bunyan. Bunyan's text, a narrative about Protestant salvation. Bunyan's narrative occurs in the context of the dream, which apparently is the solution to understanding the fantasy of Hank Morgan and Connecticut Yankee at the end of the novel. Twain's travels show the American tourist's version of going to the Holy Land in Europe is a secular experience. And of course, the time travel novel Connecticut Yankee represents a kind of pilgrimage for Hank Morgan trying to establish a modern culture contrary to that found in ancient England. Reverence is simply that, admiring one's place in the world as compared to the heavenly but physically presence of the Catholic cathedral, usually in the context of artwork from the Renaissance. Reverence, in my definition, involves the kind of admiration that Henry James felt on viewing Tintoretto's The Last Supper in the Basilica of San Giorgio Maggiore in Venice, Italy. Reverence in this narrow definition includes those Catholics who find that the afterlife or heavenly domain will be waiting as a comfort to the earthly domain. Twain rarely fits this definition, often finding these famous paintings and cathedrals rather presumptuous and overdone, particularly in his travel works. The Innocents Abroad is a pilgrimage narrative turned against itself, making the journey to Europe and the Holy Land. This new pilgrim becomes a comic voice of disenchantment, a critique and of anti-reverential tourist. Twain, or the tourist persona he adopts, announces early and often that he does not want guidebooks or other travel writers to show what to feel about Europe or its culture. Reverence for the American tourist apparently can be had for cathedrals, relics, ceremonies, and sacred spaces, but these are discarded in favor of practical American common sense. He writes, "Everything was worn out. Every block of stone was smooth and almost shapeless, with the polishing hands and shoulders of loungers who devoutly idled here in bygone centuries and have died and gone to the not simply died, I mean, he was about to say devil, of course. Twain does show reverence on occasion for some monuments to Catholicism. He writes in chapter 18 of Innocents Abroad that the Milan Cathedral is a wilderness of graceful spires. They say that the Cathedral of Milan is second only St. Peter's at Rome. I cannot understand how it can be second to anything made by human hands. That concept of reverence does not stay with him throughout the text. Twain, in this perspective of anti-reverence, doubts the very existence of Adam in Innocents Abroad. The grave of Adam, how touching it was, here in a land of strangers far away from home and friends, and all who cared for me, thus to discover the grave of a blood relation. True, a distant one, but still a relation. The unerring instinct of nature thrilled in recognition. The fountain of my filial affection was stirred to its profoundest depths, and I gave way to tumultuous emotion. Given Twain's comments about all the pieces of the cross for sale, the sarcasm about reverence about Adam's tomb more generally undercuts the commercialism of the tourist trade. But the narrative voice demonstrates Twain's rhetorical ability to appropriate the expected reverential perspective of a Christian tourist. I contend that Mark Twain reflected on his experiences while traveling into Europe in The Innocents Abroad, and later used this perspective on religion in the Connecticut Yankee. This reflection borrows from Catholic tradition in order to cast doubt upon the politics of the 19th century, particularly as it derives some principles from an authoritarian representation as a model for 19th century forms of authoritarian power. As he published the Connecticut Yankee, Twain wanted to be careful about religious issues simply because he wanted to be popular with all readers. But the novel reflects the hostility and the fears of many Protestants about Catholicism. Conversion is a very real threat to many American writers and tourists. Hilda, in Hawthorne's Marble Fawn, rejects a Catholic priest's offer of conversion. I dare not come a step further than Providence shall guide me. Do not let it grieve you, therefore, if I never return to the confessional, never dip my hands in holy water, never sign my bosom with the cross. I am a daughter of the Puritans. Twain reverses the concept of conversion in Connecticut Yankee to show how Hank Morgan is unable to convert the medieval and Catholic civilization of England to a technologically advanced and generally Protestant version of how New England in America. Like the anti-Pilgrim's voyage of the Quaker City excursion, which ridicules the reverence of the journey, Twain's cultural use of the conversion threat ends in a kind of betrayal. Twain transforms a very religious concept of betrayal into the Protestant refusal to accept an authoritarian political structure headed by the Pope or by the Catholic clergy, particularly in Innocents Abroad, generally by rejecting the authority and the cultural influence of Catholic religion with an attitude of American sarcasm and ridicule. Connecticut Yankee also transforms this concept of betrayal most clearly at the end of the novel when Hank Morgan's empire dissolves into civil war. The interdict in Connecticut Yankee represents the power of the church, a response to the authoritarianism of the boss and his elaborate empire. This betrayal works both ways. The church undermines Morgan's authority while Morgan attempts to annihilate most of England's knights. Mark Twain's response to Catholicism and Innocents Abroad in Connecticut Yankee is not just a conventional 19th century American form of anti-Catholicism. No, Twain uses both texts to further his own rejection of institutional authority. He depends on standard patterns of pilgrimage and conversion to amplify his own brand of American skepticism, mocking the religious reverence that Catholics observe, while also aware of the discipline and power that Catholicism itself demonstrates. Innocents Abroad shows a form of anti-pilgrimage. The tourist confronts sacred tradition with a cynical eye, with ridicule and sarcasm. That ridicule and sarcasm turns to doubt and fear in Connecticut Yankee when it becomes clear that Hank Morgan cannot convert a culture based in Catholicism to a modern form of anti-Catholic republicanism. That, in fact, Hank Morgan becomes an authoritarian figure when Twain has already denounced in his travels of Innocents Abroad. Anti-Catholicism in America stems in part from the fear that the Protestant would convert, a conversion that would involve a loss of a central religious identity, the convert no longer being able to claim independence of the self from a central source of authority. Twain found that kind of authoritarianism in Venice, particularly the secrecy and betrayal found in the Bocca di Leoni, or Lions' Mouths, that he describes in chapter 22 of The Innocents Abroad, which served as mailboxes for accusations thrust in secretly at dead of night, the confessional booth being the analog. Citizens of Venice, Twain felt, would be sent to dungeons without trial, a trial that ought to involve the community at large, a kind of Protestant recognition of the individual's place in society, a system of justice denied by the analogous Catholicism found in the Lions' Mouths, very loosely based on the confessional box. Hank Morgan cannot win against that kind of level of secrecy in the Connecticut Yankee, even as he assumes he can establish some kind of Protestant democracy because of the inherent level of secrecy found in the confessional booth. Twain finds the act of rebellion central in Connecticut Yankee, a disavowal of European influence, and to his American Vandal's appreciation of the aesthetics of Catholic cathedrals in Innocents Abroad. The church is the enemy in Connecticut Yankee. Catholicism represents an anti-democratic faith and innocence abroad. Both works suggest the range of the responses from both American writers who encountered general concepts of pilgrimage, conversion, reverence, and betrayal, concepts vital within Catholicism and its antithesis in American culture. With Twain's works, not just these two, that range speaks not of acceptance but of resistance to the cultural values that somehow entice at the same time American writers refuse to accept. Catholicism matters in these texts because of the critique of authority, religious, political, cultural, embedded in what the American traveler and the Yankee describe, sharply shown by Hank's counter-conversion because his own project reproduces the authoritarian structures he claims to oppose. By trying to replace the church in an image from the 19th century as Sir Boss, Hank Morgan's journey back in time to a 6th century England proves the foolishness of the attempt. Morgan cannot simply replace a culture embedded in the religion of England. The Catholic Church dominates Arthurian culture. It is an authoritarian structure, to be sure. However, Morgan's empire is as evil as the church. My works showed what a despot could do with the resources of a kingdom at his command. Twain's description of that version of the imported 19th century culture undercuts any beneficial notion of that conversion process, his kingdom becoming an authoritarian travesty of that technological democracy. An earthly despotism is not merely a bad form of government, it is the worst form that is possible. My work showed what a despot could do with the resources of a kingdom at his command. Morgan's timeless death in the cave, cursed by Merlin for a sleep of some 13 centuries, ends the experiment of conversion, for Morgan has simply exchanged his role as lost pilgrim to that of an authoritarian adrift in his dream of Sandy, an act of betrayal to his own faith in democracy. Morgan's failed conversion of Arthurian England is therefore not merely a defeat by the church. It is a demonstration that a reformer cannot simply replace the one authoritarian system with another one based on technological moral certainty. Thank you.